Hello, this is Graham Salinger with Salinger Coaching Solutions. Welcome to PEP, which stands for Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance. I'm very honored today to have somebody that is really embodies perseverance in the work that she has done in her life story. I am joined today by Professor Tutdeal, who is the Director of Equity and Inclusion for Chorus Services, which is a Philadelphia-based nonprofit that assists children, youth, and families experiencing emotional, academic, and social challenges, which impede their development and productivity. Professor Tutdeal teaches mediation and conflict coaching teaches mediation at Arcadia University and the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Graduate Program. She is the founder and director of NyaEden Foundation, Inc., which helps to empower females in war-torn African countries and keep them safe using a holistic approach that looks at healing, body, mind, and spirit, while also providing empowerment, vocational, and educational workshops for girls and women who have suffered the damaging effects of war and violent conflict. She has over decades of experience with international conflict mitigation, peace building, trauma awareness, storytelling, and refugee and immigrant advocacy. She has worked with various groups, including, but not limited to, government and nonprofit agencies, to ensure program compliance and regulation standards are being met. She is experienced in developing and conducting training courses and managing and coordinating workshops in culturally sensitive settings. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you. I'm super excited to be here.
Good. We're excited to have you. I think that to start, I read your bio, but I think really to really understand who you are, I like to talk to, and I do this when I do my coaching, is really hear people's narratives, because that really plays into their experiences inform the way they live their lives, right? So I think when people hear your bio, it's pretty clear that you've done a lot of work to empower others to transform their lives in some pretty, tough spots, some hard situations. So can you tell our viewers about your life experiences that have informed your work?
So I love the fact that you start with narrative work because as Chimamanda has said, the danger of a single story. And I think that's what's so problematic in different parts of the world or even in the United States of how one particular group of people are painted by one narrative, right? So my narrative started in a refugee camp in Ethiopia. I am South Sudanese and I'm also Ethiopian, right? And so there's the identity politics as well. So we may be here for hours. So I'm at a board, I'm the Nur people, that's my people. We're in South Sudan and we're in Ethiopia. So we have that border politics and border identity. But I was born in a refugee camp and grew up, spent my formative years there. And then in 91, a war happened in Ethiopia and we had to walk to South Sudan, or then Sudan, now South Sudan, and stay there for a year and then walk right back again until my family was resettled in the US about 24 years ago as refugee through the refugee process. My mother was able to use her South Sudanese identity to have us be able to get into the refugee process. And unlike most refugees, it took them about 17 years to get out of a camp. My family was very lucky. It took us only, about 5 years or so. And we were fortunate enough because we had a family reunification, and then also my brother needed a medical attention. We had medical case as well. So that's where my narrative started, and that's where my passion and my purpose I'm always going back as to why I do this work, because it's personally tied to me. And when I go back and work with these young women or these communities, I'm seeing myself.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say you see yourself, what has been empowering for you that have been lessons that you've learned in terms of helping other people that might be in similar situations than the one that you came from?
So for me, there's a particular trip. So the NyaEden Foundation, we took a trip in December of 2019, last year before COVID shut us down. We went to Gambela, the very place that I was born in, and we went to a refugee camp, and we went to we understand that when it comes to host communities and refugees, there's often conflict. So we made sure that when we went into those communities, we had a balance to not only be with the host community, but then also be with the refugee as well. And even though I'm from that community, I went back in with cultural humility and sat at the footprint of the community and say, what is it that you need? We're here to help you, instead of coming in and saying, I know what you need because I'm from this community, right? But I went in there with privilege. It's not white privilege, it's educational privilege. It's being somebody in the diaspora and all of these things. So my team and I recognized that we had a level of privilege and just being educated women as well. So when we went in there, we went to a boarding school that had all the 5 ethnic groups that are in Gambela area. And it was just phenomenal. They put on a nice program for us. And then we were all greeted by a representative that spoke their language. We were all greeted with their individual languages. And one of the young women that happens to speak the language that I speak, my native language, made a profound statement that still speaks to me today, that I still take with me today, and I'm still processing today. She said, you came back, you look like me. So for me, it's that interrupting the white savior complex. And it was just profound. And it's just like, you understand me from the depth of me because you look like me, you have the same culture as me and things of that nature. So for me, it was just like, I'm not only doing this work, but I'm also empowering a young woman that could see herself, that I too could become like you, instead of trying to imagine herself from a perspective of seeing a white woman. And that's where a lot of self-hate comes into play too, when we're talking about race identity as well. So it was phenomenal. And even the refugee camp that we went to, we spoke to 200 women. And the oldest woman that was in school was 39, and she was in the 11th grade. And so for her, she comes to school every day to empower the young girls to continue to go into school. And saying that education has no age, has no limit.
Right.
We spoke to the young women, and also we talked about child marriage, early marriages, peer pressure in the community. And when I told them how old I was, and to just encourage them that, yes, you can be this age and choose education rather than all of the other social pressures, if you have that luxury. Right. And always fight for education, because that's the only thing that's going to take you out of whatever situation you're in. It's going to interrupt the cycles, the many cycles that we're all in. So take advantage of the small education that's being provided by the aid agencies, whether it's UNICEF, UN, and just preserve. Even if you have to come to school with your child, which a lot of the young girls were doing, the young women were doing, they were coming to school with their children. And the enthusiasm that they had to learn the English language, because they know that it's a global community. You know, they said, for us to be in the global market, we have to learn this language. So it was, I'm still processing. Still processing.
No, I think what's great about that example is she was sticking with it, you know, at 39 and being in the 11th grade, and still having that drive, even with all the circumstances. And you point out some key words when talking about the work that you've done in empowerment. You talked about your passion and your purpose. And so I do a lot of work with my coaching with my clients about their individual passion, their individual purpose, or if it's group coaching, you know, working with business leaders about their group mission, their group purpose, and things like that. And one of the things that I tell my clients that I really try to hit home is that if you want to change results, you have to change mindsets. And so that means if you want to achieve, you have to believe, right? So obviously that example that you gave, that woman who was in the 11th grade and 39, obviously believed in herself and her self-worth and her self-empowerment. So can you walk me through a little bit about how you started the foundation, and how that dream of yours became a reality, and what your journey was like?
So the foundation, I co-founded the foundation with Kuoth Wiel. She is an actress and a model. She's actually in The Good Life with Reese Witherspoon. Oh. And South Sudan went into our own civil war in 2013. And so her and I felt helpless, you know, through the whole conflict. And we were just brainstorming. We wanted to start it off with a broad drive. But we're like, wait, is that what they really need? Is that what they really want? Why are we going in with this perception? And through just ideas and really thinking, okay, we once were young women that were refugees. What is it that we needed? It wasn't bras, right? Bras were the last things we needed. And then we started communicating with people back home, because we still have families that are now refugees in various countries, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and some even went back to Egypt. So we started communicating with family back home and said, okay, with this conflict, what is it that's really needed? And it's always the resilience of people, and knowledge has always been a thing. And for us, realizing that a lot of South Sudanese or a lot of Africans, we go back, but we don't go back to the level of the bigger aid agencies that go back, right? And so we just thought about ourselves. When we were young, wouldn't it have been so empowering to see yourself and not just somebody of a different nationality? How empowering would it have been to just see yourself? And that's basically what really got us starting this work. And although we're not doing our international work at the moment, we are doing mentorship here. We're mentoring in the US. So we're both domestic and international. We're mentoring. And we're working on fundraising so that we can get our mission back to Ethiopia in 2021. So the trip that we did in November, December, we were actually sponsored by Days for Girls, which is an organization that's in over 100+ countries, and they sew reusable menstrual pads. And so that's one of the things that we're like, when we become of age as women, what do we have? Even here in America, poverty period is a thing. So we were thinking about sustainability. It's coming from the community. You don't want to give people a fish to eat for a day. You want to teach them how to fish.
Right.
And so those cloth menstrual pads, you're able to wash them. The lifespan are 6 months to a year. And the plan is to actually open up a center where we can teach these women how to sew them so that they can sell them as well. It could become a business, an entrepreneurship business. So that's how we started it. And then Ethiopian Airlines sponsored us with tickets. So it was a community thing. Again, it's not an individual idea or anything like that. It's a community, like how you're doing this work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you connect needs, right? Talking about needs and success and momentum really happens when needs are expressed, validated, and then and then you can really build relationship and community around those needs and coalescing that. So I thank you for bringing that up. I think that's really important. And what you've talked a lot about is something simple as an idea about bras or something, and just how that can create so much momentum. And empower, and being empowered, in my view, really only goes as far as the amount of momentum you have that will propel you forward, right? So thank you for bringing that idea up as well. And so when you think about the work that you've done with women who've been harmed by war and conflict, you spoke a little bit about some of the success stories, the example of that woman who's going to school and really being a role model. In those spaces or in other spaces where you've seen harm, what are some success stories that you can share?
A lot of the success stories are actually having women being full stakeholders, right? And that's one of the things that when I advocate for gender equality, it's not just representation. It's not just us being at the table. We're fully at the table as stakeholders. Again, the most recent example is just the trip that we took to Ethiopia, and how the boarding school that we went to, the person that was the principal, you could call it the principal, although they have a different title, that was a woman. And she made sure that these young women were taken care of in a way that nurtured their unity for self, because the area we went to, there's conflict between all these ethnic groups, and particularly 2 ethnic groups that had issues. And she made sure that they rallied around their gender, because at the end of the day, we were the one losing everything as women. When war happened, we're the victim of war by not only violence being perpetrated towards us, but our husbands, our fathers, our brothers, our children, and realizing that we are equally losing regardless of what ethnic group you're from. And I am so proud of that. Nyalip Philip, I'm so proud of her. She actually got promoted to becoming a minister, and she's in politics in Ethiopia. So she's phenomenal woman. So that was one of the biggest success that I had seen, and the relationship building, because we recognize each other. And when we went, she made sure she went and beyond to make sure that our trip was successful, because logistics is another thing, right? And when you're here going from a Western perspective, oh yeah, things are going to get done like this. And you get on the ground and you're like, whoa, American move a lot more faster than a lot of our nations, which also gives you times to reflect and saying, why are we so fast? Why are we not enjoying the process? Why isn't the process being enjoyed? So that also gives us a different reflection. And then just being able to, the young women we are mentoring, having them here in the States, having them move from high school into colleges and owning their identity as Black women in America, also as immigrant women in America, and processing everything that's going on right now in a healthier manner, helping them, with the whole conflict coaching process, and then with the identity piece of confidence. How do you own your space in a world, in a space that tells you, as the darker you are, the more threatening you are, in the race war of America, but for them to fully own that space. So for me, that's been phenomenal. I'm just like, oh my gosh, yes.
Can you talk about what that mentorship? I know that you do specific like workshops and training around vocational education and empowerment. Can you talk about what sort of pedagogically, I suppose, what that empowerment mentorship relationship looks like?
So our mentorship relationship, obviously, we've gone through this work ourselves as being immigrant children in this country, being as dark, as well melanated as I am,
right.
And really, it comes from self, right? We're using ourselves as an example, as the casework, and the problems that we have as immigrant children or as immigrant women, where when you're at home, your home is South Sudan, or your home is Russia if you're a Russian child, if you're a Mexican child. When you step outside the house, then that's America. So how do you balance your two worlds? Because we're all living in two worlds. And earlier in my career, I had an opportunity to work with a Native American tribe in Nebraska called the Ponca tribe in Nebraska. They're forever my family. And that's where I got this idea, and this is where I got all of this information from elders. I sat at the foot of elders and was like, hey, I'm teaching your children their culture. I'm researching it from secondary sources, coming from people that wrote about y'all and not you. So what can I do to teach your children and add to what I'm learning? And one of the elders said, well, have them wear a moccasins on one leg and a tennis shoes on the other. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then after I processed, I'm like, okay, balance. We have to walk our worlds. We equally have to walk our worlds. We can't tip too much into the other.
Yeah, one of the things that I appreciate that you're talking about is foundationally, it's all about relationships, right? Relationships with our own identity, even if our identity is like a lot of things, right? And then relationships with our world and relationships with other people. And that success and empowerment in some ways involves sort of navigating some of that in a way that is able to make you thrive, right? So at Salinger Coaching Solutions, we focus a lot on relationships, especially the relationship between three things: passion, purpose, and perseverance, right? If you have a strong passion and you have a strong purpose, you should be able to persevere because you have some level of motivation and drive, and a purpose kind of holds you to something that will keep you going even when you're sort of thrown off your game, right? Because you have a foundational thing that you're trying to reach, right? So as we talk about the relationship between those three things and how you've been empowered in your life and how you've empowered others, I'd like to start the conversation with perseverance. Can you talk a little bit about your life story for me, and I think for others who've heard so far, is a story of perseverance. So you've touched on it. Can you talk a little bit more about what has helped you persevere?
Oh man, that's a good reflecting question. What helped me persevere? A lot. And when we're talking about, I come back to relationship, I come back to people. As much as one can persevere by themselves, but it has to be a community, right? And I think for me, I consider myself first and foremost an Indigenous woman of the African continent. And for us as Indigenous people, we don't believe in self. We don't believe in the individual person. We believe in the collective. Mm-hmm. So the whole saying, I am because we are, it's always in my forefront when I do work. And that's what drives me, because singularly I can stand, but if wind comes, it'll knock me down. But if there's a bushel of us, a wind could not easily knock us down. So for me, there's been people along my journey that have helped me persevere in times where I cannot do it as an individual. And just being able to be a child in a refugee camp and having somebody in the US say, you know what, we will sponsor, we'll be the host family. We'll guide them through navigating their first 3 months in America, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Even the elementary school that I went to, Franklin Elementary School, I'm actually looking for my principal, Mr. Andrew, and the educators that just wrapped their arms around all these children that were from different parts of the world that were just navigating this life that they were not told to process, right? But as educator, they did things that no other educator would be able to do now. Every time I think of waffles or pancakes, I think of my ESL teacher's home, because she took us in a field trip and showed us these things and what they smell like. So it's as simple as that, as people interjecting themselves. And I remember in high school, Mrs. Brown, I think she might have seen that I was grappling with the identity thing. And so she had me do a research paper on the civil rights movement. And so for me, that catapulted my research of researching my new identity that's being given to me as a Black American woman, not understanding the legacy of slavery and what the descendants of the African continent have gone through, and how do I process that. So it's been people along my journey that have helped me when I am not able to do it as an individual.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, and this kind of actually goes back to our previous conversation, is that you have served as a mirror for other people, right? They see themselves in you, and that's so empowering. And that's because you've had others that have helped mirror you as well. So I think that's awesome. You brought up, in terms of coming to terms or learning and thinking about your identity, you just brought up the civil rights movement. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge sort of a reawakening of that's happening right now. We're at a very unique moment in our country in terms of people being systematically disempowered. We're also seeing a very empowered generation, younger generation, that's doing a lot of work to get their power back, and rightfully so. Having said that, that's a result of long-time collective trauma, harm, and grief. And based on your both life experience and professional experience, what advice would you give people who are sitting with this moment that we're in right now, and they don't know what to do because they feel so disempowered?
Process the feelings, right? Start with self, process the feeling, because again, you're in the flight, freeze, respond because of all this trauma, whether it's actual physical trauma towards you, if you are in the front line and going to protest every night with everything that's going on, or if you are being secondary traumatized by TV and all of the social media stuff that are coming to you, is process your feeling first, because we ultimately have to take care of self. All of this, we have to get it together, and then you can respond. So for me, when George Floyd death came out and everybody was out, I was getting phone calls. Everybody was checking on me. We know you're a protester. You're on the front line. Take care of yourself. I'm like, actually, no, I'm not protesting. I have sat with self, and I have assessed myself and assessed my privilege and where do I show up. So for me now, I have elevated to a different type of protest. I'm in the meetings. I'm in where policies are being made.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I feel I need to be during this war, for lack of a better word. And then for those that need to be on the street to make that noise, to have that visibility, that's their space. But I had to sit and really analyze, like, okay, where do I belong in this? Where's my purpose in this? Mm-hmm. Where does it make sense? Which space do I need to occupy that makes sense? So for
mm-hmm.
me, it's in the policy world. Right?
Okay. Right. Yeah, and I appreciate you, and that goes also back to the idea of there's not a singular story, right? People were expecting you to protest, and you're saying, well, I'm actually at the table making decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's awesome. And you keep bringing it back to purpose. And I guess I haven't actually directly asked you, if you could summarize what your purpose is in all of the work that you've done and the life experience you've had, what is your life's purpose?
I think for me, it changed, but it doesn't change. My life purpose is when I leave this space physically, I know that my energy will still be around through the various work that I've touched, is to leave humanity a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically it. It drives me, whatever work I've done. And I learned this when I was working with the Ponca tribe in Nebraska, and we would go on nature walks with the elders. And when we would go camping to identify medicinal herbs and things, and the elders would always say, we're travelers. Let's not leave anything that's damaging to the earth, right? We will take what we need and thank the earth for it, but don't ever leave unnecessary, don't ever leave unnecessary wrath or, per se, if you don't need to do that. So leave the place that you've occupied as much as it was original, right? But then also if it needs to change it. So for me, it's a matter of making the impact, the ripple effect that I need to make in my life, in the lives of those that I'm touching by the work that I'm doing. And that's what brings me back. Like, how can I leave humanity a better place? How can I leave humanity a lot better than when I came in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whether it's in this continent or in the African continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful, because I think sometimes, people get stuck because they're not on their career path, or they're in a job they don't like, or they don't like their boss, whatever it is. And sometimes it's because they don't have, they lack motivation, and sometimes it's because they don't have sort of they haven't figured out what their higher purpose is, and therefore they haven't figured out how to behave when stuff hits the fan, right? And so I think that's helpful, because I think you've been able to find career paths and find career spaces because you know exactly the sort of the grand plan that you have, and so that opens up a lot of possibilities, right? When you have that. So I appreciate.
But then also too, for those people that may not be clear, because I was not clear.
Sure.
And often I'm still not clear how I'm going to go about it. And if you're in a dead end, if you feel you're in a dead end situation, whether it be a job or anything like that, sure. Like you said, it's a matter of changing your mindset.
Right.
Right. The career path, the jobs that I have done, I needed to do so that I could be where I'm at. I needed those skills. I did not know the universe was orchestrating all of that, right? It's looking at it, okay, what do I need to learn where I'm at that's going to catapult me to where I need to be?
Mm-hmm. Momentum, like that, right?
Changing that mindset, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I'm stuck in this job. It's like, no, what do I need to learn about this job? What skills am I learning that are going to transfer to my next elevation?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Right. I think sometimes, we have, there's a ceiling and there's a floor, right? And if you have set your bar low, right, if your ceiling is here, then you've actually set yourself up to have a floor, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm only going to be this successful ever, well, then you're never going to get anywhere above that, because you've set your floor, you've set your expectations and your accountability to yourself so low. And I think that when you talk about perseverance, like that can happen, right? When people get stuck, it's because they are not seeing a ceiling, they're just seeing a floor. And part of that, I think, has to do with not being able to fully get in their feels and process. We talk a lot about processing, right? They're not able to process what their passions are, what enables them to persevere, and what their purpose is. So I appreciate your insight with that too, because that also is about mind shift, right? Mindset shift, is being able to know, oh, you know what? My ceiling is so much higher, because you have to believe that. And I know you've talked a lot about identity, and unfortunately, I think a lot of the messages that people get for various reasons is that they have a ceiling that's low, and being empowered is about, like, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to break through that. I'm going to break through that ceiling. I'm not going to have a floor. I'm going to keep going and going and going, which it feels like has been a really big, like that seems like your mentality is you're like, all right, I met this floor, bam, next, bam, next, bam.
Also even changing it. Why do we have to have a ceiling? Why can't you just have
even better?
Why do you have to have a ceiling? I mean, right. For me, I'm an Indigenous woman. We have huts, right? They're seasonal. So this concrete ceiling, and there's somebody above me in this apartment that may be a struggle or a conflict if you try to break this, because that person is going to come down. So why do you even have to have ceilings?
Even better. Thank you. Yeah, great. What are, I guess, to sort of summarize all the things we've been talking about so far, and again, you've touched on it, but can you speak a little bit more about what has been super motivating for you? I mean, you've obviously been very successful professionally and personally, coming from the situation that you're in, but when you came to the United States, right, from the situation that you have been in, I'm sure that there was some struggle, and I'm sure that it wasn't easy. So as amazing as you are, I'm sure there is more backstory in terms of perhaps some struggle. So what has been? Can you sort of walk me through that journey to how you've been so successful and what's motivated that?
So I guess you could say I've always been want to take the less traveled road. Well, the first struggle was I didn't speak a lick of English. Mm-hmm. That was the first struggle. But then again, the community showed up, right? The community showed up to the point where I was able to speak with you now. There's been a lot of struggles, right? Again, it's the whole identity of having to balance two worlds. And also when it comes to being a Black child in this country, being raised by a single parent, all of the demographics, right? It's like working against all odds of single parent, immigrant, low income, all of that good stuff, right? All of the numerators. And then also coming from seeing things that a human being should not see, right? Witnessing war firsthand. I think at one point I took the ACE score and mine is a 7. Right? And so for me to even be here and be like, yo, I have an ACE score of a 7. Mm-hmm. That's ridiculous.
Can you contextualize that for some of our viewers? I'm not sure everybody knows what that means.
So the ACE is the adverse
childhood experiences.
Yep, childhood experience. And that the original research was done in California, and it was mostly with white people. And so it's the traumatic experience that you have experienced, then it gives you a number. And so the higher your number is, the likelihood that your lifespan is going to be short, you're going to deal with substance abuse, all of these things, because you have experienced so many trauma experiences. Mm-hmm. But then also it decreases when you have people in your life that are going to offset those traumas. So for me, again, it's the community, right? And when I think of it, I'm like, oh, my ACE score was a 7, but I also had communities along the way, people along the way. And then for me, I was an athlete. And I think most of my confidence came from being an athlete. I ran track, I played basketball, I did taekwondo, I tried cross country for a season to keep in shape for basketball, but that's not me.
That's why I played soccer.
See, I did not play football. It's football.
Football, my bad.
I did not play football. So I was very much, it's always fighting against the odds.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was very much like and even now, right? I'm always like, I've always been the first. My co-founder and I, we talked about this, and we talked to our mentees about being the first in your family, the first to graduate high school, the first to go to college. And right now, I'm the first in my family, or even in my, clan community, to start their PhD as a woman. So it's always knowing that you're doing it for self, but then also there's somebody looking at you. There's somebody that's saying, you know what? A door has been opened. Again, that ceiling. This person broke the ceiling, but right. I don't think of ceilings. I think of doors.
Okay.
Somebody opened that door. Somebody cracked that door open for me, and I'm leaving it open for them, so that they can come and open it even more, so that more people can pass through it or could come to the table, that decisions are being made. But yeah, again, like, it's just a regular story of single parenthood, low income, immigrant, trauma, all of these things. But for me, it's always been about, again, it goes back to the purpose. It goes back to answering, who am I? Mm-hmm. Why am I here? Mm-hmm. And it didn't always happen that way. I think I definitely, when I was 23, I dropped out of college. I was at a community college, dropped out of college completely, which was against the community, which was against my family as well, where in my culture, you either leave the home to go to your husband's house, or you leave to go to college, now that we're in this continent. But I said, no, I have to go do a self-discovery journey.
So what did you do when you dropped out of college? What was that?
Oh, I moved to New York.
Okay.
I had a cousin that lived in New York. She lived in Manhattan. And I was like, oh, hey, can I come house sit? She was like, house sit? I'm like, white people house sit all the time. She was like, wait, do you mean just, I'm like, you're in and out of the country, so I can come and house sit. So she never heard of house sitting. So I house sat. And I think for me, in hindsight, looking now, I was a depressed young woman, not realizing all of the trauma, not having processed, because I was in survival mode.
Sure.
And I didn't realize how race also has impacted everything that I was dealing with. And the first time I went to Harlem in 2009, not Harlem now. Right. It was the closest I've ever felt to being in the African continent, to see the Senegalese woman that looked like me being mistaken for Senegalese, and, seeing the African print, the fabrics that I was running away from. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have kept the clothes that were given to me. But yeah, I had to do that self-discovery journey. I call it my unpaid sabbatical.
Okay. And what did you learn during your unpaid sabbatical that got you to where you are now?
I learned about self. I learned about resilience. I learned about my beliefs and my values. What do I stand for? So now a win can come, and I will be stuck in my values and what I believe in. And for me, I believe in humanity as a whole. And of course, there's bad apples in humanity, regardless of what skin shade we come in from. And so my fight is to make sure that those bad apples do not taint the rest of us. I'm just like, I found self. And I wish that a lot of young African women would do the journey, and not even just young African women, just women in general, right? And it's interesting, I laugh because growing up in the Midwest, I always felt like the European or the American culture was a lot superior than mine. But then when I realized, I was like, it's the same. All of my classmates that I went to high school with, they're all married. When I went back, some of them are divorced. When I went back, I was like the only single one. We had me and my girlfriends had at dinner, and it was like, everybody was like, oh yeah, I gotta get home by this time, the kids, my husband. I'm looking at them like, wow. And again, we had that conversation of, they felt that they had to be married at a certain age and all of these things. But I'm like, this is very much my culture. So again, it's always learning. I learned that I'm a learner. I love cultures. I love exploration learning, experiential learning is my thing. As much as we can learn from the book, it's being with the people, right? Immersing yourself with the people. And I really appreciate our program that we did at Arcadia, of us going and studying the books, but then going into the communities and doing that field work. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's some great connections between culture, and also, like, you know, you mentioned that you sort of broke away from cultural expectations, and then you saw all these white people that were fitting very specific cultural expectations. So it's interesting that, you know, in coaching, and I'm sure in the work that you've done facilitating and mediating and doing your own coaching and work, you probably talk to people about limited belief systems, right? Which is why we have those bars or ceilings that need to be doors, right? And I think sometimes cultural expectations can be limiting. And be sort of pressure and stressors, and people get fatigued because they're trying to meet other people's expectations. So I think your story of both breaking away from those cultural expectations, but also finding yourself within your cultural framework and finding your identity, and then realizing how much it's not just about cultural expectations, it's also about cultural support to help lift you up even when you falter, so to speak, right? So I love that story and those connections. So you talked about resiliency, right? I've used the word perseverance a lot. I mean, you've talked about resiliency, and this is a time, and we talked about it in terms of the racial tensions that have been going on. You know, we also want to acknowledge that we're in a moment of global pandemic, right? And so there are, understatement, I know. So there are a lot of people who may have thought they're resilient, and then maybe they're not as resilient, or conversely didn't realize how resilient they are until now. So can you just talk about what has helped, what do you see is the relationship between resiliency and empowerment at both the individual, collective, and systematic level? And sort of in the context of COVID specifically, what advice would you maybe have for people who are sort of for the first time questioning their resiliency, or the first time they're really in a situation that is this?
When you ask that question, the only the quote that comes to mind is I don't know who said it, I forgot. I think it might have been started around by Bob Marley or somebody else. I'm not quite sure who it is, so don't quote me on it. But it says, "You don't know how strong you are until the only thing that you know is being strong." Right? And so for me, it's all kind of question, right? Because, and knowing, also, I always go back to the collective. We're all in this together as a globe. Although we're individually being impacted, but we're experiencing this all together, right? Me being in the Americas, like you are, we're experiencing it the same way as people that are in Europe are experiencing it in their way, and those that are in the African continent. So it's knowing that you are not alone experiencing this pandemic. We're collectively experiencing it. It's just that our individual experiences differ depending on your access to care or your access to whatever may be going on, the needs that you need. It's okay to question. But then also too, a lot of people were talking about, why do we have to quarantine? Why are we have to be stuck at home? And for me, I took this time of being in solitude. For me, it's a time of being in solitude. And I tell my friends that as much as we as a collective are not doing so well, as an individual, I thrive during this time. Right. And then sometimes survivor guilt kind of kicks in too, not only from thriving and during this pandemic, but then also where I came from and the things that I have done. Survivor guilt is one thing that I often talk about. And how do you get over that? Or how do you learn to live with that? But I looked at this time as a time of the universe, God, your higher being, whatever you call it, right? Letting you know, like, sit down and be humble. And reflect. And so for me, from my early upbringing, I never knew what stillness is. I never knew what stillness was or is and still. Right. So it was time for me to really learn how to be still. And I tell, as I talk to my different immigrant friends, I'm like, we've moved from experiencing war, crossing borders, sometime crossing state. You know, I moved here from Nebraska to go to, you know, to meet you at Arcadia, you know, to go. So for me, it's always been movement. I've always just been on the move.
Right.
So this time has been, okay, be still and go inward and really do an inventory of self. Work on the things that you feel no longer serve you and let them go with grace. Thank them and let them go with grace. And then welcome those new things that you need to work on, so that when all of this is over, you can fully go back to whatever that new normal will be for all of us, and excel in who you are and what it is. So for me, this was a time for me to re-examine my purpose. And so that's how we should look at it. And again, we're also dealing with all of the trauma of everything else that's going on in the mix of this pandemic.
Right.
In terms of political turmoil, it's really take care of self.
Right.
So that we could be healthier for everybody else.
So it's both a learning and growth opportunity.
Yep.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, it's funny when I speak and I think a lot in terms of both story and in metaphor, right? And when you mentioned the globe, like a picture came to my mind of like a big circle, right? And you talked about all of us are connected. And obviously a lot of the work that I do with people involves process involving people meeting in circles for conversation, right? And so when I think of, you know, we're all connected, like you said, so yeah, I just, you know, I think, you know, like, why do I have a wedding band that's a circle, right? Why are we connected to ourselves and to others through circles, right? I have, right, because relationships are so important, right? You might say, I don't have all the awesome plants you have in your background and all that stuff, right?
Life. You have that.
Exactly right. The tree of life. And so when you think of resiliency, and when I think of resiliency and I think of the tree of life, right? It's not just a tree. It's in my situation, it's a hoop, right? And so success and empowerment and resiliency, while it may not grow on trees, it does have roots, right? It has roots in community. It has roots in relationship, right? It has roots in being grounded and processing yourself, right? So yeah, success, not everybody can be super successful. But everybody can be rooted in a way that allows for that, right? Not everybody is born into the ability to have success, but everybody can get there because there are such great foundational roots. So just wanted to say that because your visual of the globe and the connectivity of people and humanity as even though things don't grow on trees, there are still roots that allow things to blossom, right? So thank you for that. So my questions so far have been centered around the paradigm that I use in my coaching practice in understanding empowerment, right? And so I look at it through the lens of passion, which you've eloquently talked about yourself, purpose, and of course, perseverance or resiliency, which we just had a discussion about. But I would like to ask you, you know, that's just sort of the way that I think about it. What does empowerment look like for you, though? What are some of the things that you think about that help you understand how to best live a more empowered life?
So for me, empowerment is simple, right? I even had an organization, or I had a meeting, I was at a workshop where I even talked about the word empowerment and what does that mean? And is that problematic when we're talking about communities in the global south or disenfranchised communities? So for me, I even grapple with that, right? But for me, empowerment looks like giving somebody the tools to farm their own farm, or giving somebody the tools to do what they need to do with it, right? The accurate tools. If the person is a farmer, giving them farming equipment, not giving them sewing machines, right? So for me, it's always tools that that person is going to use to fish for a lifetime instead of giving them that fish. Because most people think empowerment is giving the person something. Right. I have given you a degree. Let's use higher education for an example. I've given you a degree. You have taken this degree, but if you haven't given me the tools to be successful in the workforce, and I've just gone through the classes, and and did not give me workshops on how to build a resume, did not give me, the adequate internships that I need to do so that I can make those relationships. And you just said, here's your degree, go forth and succeed. That's not a great tool.
Right.
The tool comes with everything else, and I think both you and I are successful because of the tools that Arcadia University gave us. And not only being international, but also being domestic. And then having our alumni, for me, I appreciated when the alumni came back and was like, look at where I'm at. I too did the same program. And I'm a connection for you, that I'm a tool that you could tap into when you are ready to go into the workforce. So for
it also builds confidence, right?
Yes.
Like you said, being a mirror for other immigrants or women or immigrant women or immigrant women of color, right? There's so many, you're like a magic mirror room, right? You got so many mirrors that you're reflecting people. Sorry?
I said the intersectionalities are just.
Right. But I think that's part of that is what's given you so much confidence, right? What other things make you, that you have to be confident to be successful, right? So what are some things that have empowered your confidence?
Oh, that's a process. That's a self-journey that one has to take. And that comes with a lot of affirmations, right? So for me particularly, I wasn't always as confident.
Right.
I grew up wanting to hide because of how melanated my skin is and how much the sun loved me and kissed me this much, right? But not until I saw, again, it's the mirroring thing, not until I actually came to the East Coast where I worked and my supervisor was a Black woman. And I'm like, oh, okay. Where when I was in Nebraska and when I was in South Dakota, I left positions because I was just a representation that HR needed to mark off. So that did a lot of damage for self. And then when I, again, it's also mentorship, having mentors, right? Somebody that has gone through it and can shake you out of it, right? Metaphorically shake you out of it and say, get it together. You hold this type of power and don't let anybody else diminish your light, right? And also it's speaking in the light. Don't let others diminish your light, because regardless of how bright your light shines, it does not take away from everybody's light. So for me, it took a while. Again, it's that self journey that one has to take. And it's a lot of writing in my mirror, writing my affirmation, saying them in the morning, making sure I'm connected to the right networks that will also empower me. And in my group of circle and the groups that I'm in, you have to make sure you're in the right circles, right? And those circles are people that want to see you succeed and not look at you as the threat when you succeed, right? And I think that's an issue nowadays, where people will just be like, oh, wait, you're climbing so much. No. We need to pull you down a little bit, right?
Or become a competition in the workplace, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Just in life, right? You're not keeping up with the Jones. Everybody's a Joan, right? Everybody's a Joan. Everybody's a John. You're not keeping up with anybody. You're walking in your own lane and in your purpose. And all of us have a unique divine assignment. And that's what we have to realize, that when you are in, I took a workshop called Cracking the Identity Workshop by Toyose. She's a Nigerian sister. And I woke up at 5 a.m. to take this workshop, and she's in Nigeria, right? And one of the things that she talked about was the design assignment. If you are in your divine assignment, she talked about it from the Christianity perspective of if you were meant to be Noah's assistant and helping him, as with the ark, and you decided that you're going to be Noah and manage the whole project, you're never going to succeed, because that's not your divine assignment. But when you acknowledge that I am meant to be the assistant, then you are going to flourish regardless, because you are in your purpose, you are in your divine assignment. And she used an example of you could want to open a shop because everybody else is opening a shop and they're succeeding, and you can go get the best real estate location where there's traffic and everything, and nobody will ever come into your shop because that's not your divine assignment. That's not your divine purpose. But you can sell t-shirts and that's your divine assignment and be a millionaire.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's a really interesting concept. What I've used, and I think there's a connection, is not that concept. Well, I've talked about something that is, I try to get my clients, whether it's an individual or an organization, to function in something that I call the empowerment zone, right? Being in the zone, flourishing in their zone. And that, of course, the empowerment zone is the passion, the purpose, and the perseverance. And so knowing your zone and sticking to that zone is what I also try to do. So that's awesome. Are there any other sort of takeaways or a summary that you want to make of sort of what you've talked about today?
Oh, this has been a very intriguing conversation. I didn't know I was going to talk this long.
No, I don't want to end, but.
No, it's just, continue doing what you need to do as a person for not only self, but also for humanity, and then do it in your most authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people forget to realize, is that for confidence, for everything else to fall in place, you have to be authentic. And knowing that you are uniquely made makes a difference, right? They can never be anybody like you. Even if you're a twin, there's a difference in DNA. There's a difference in your fingerprints. So be authentic in everything that you do. And that's the only way to be in your divine assignment. It's all about. And then also realizing that relationships are crucial and they're important. And
they're also work.
They are work. They are hard work. And knowing that, some bridges you may need to walk away from, but don't burn them, right? Mm-hmm. Do not burn bridges. It's okay to walk away and go and use a different bridge. But this whole bridge burning concept, no, we ain't gonna do that. So just be your most authentic self and then enjoy the process.
That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you. All right. Again, everybody, that was Professor Tutdeal giving us some really empowering some information from both her life experience and the work that she has done with others. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.